Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Beardsley, Senior Policy Counsel with the U.S. Green Building Council. Really excited for today's session here at the Buildings Pavilion at COP28. We'll be talking about the critical issue of decarbonizing our buildings, looking at a new report that we are launching today, as well as hearing from leaders from the U.S. and globally in how we tackled this problem and some of the solutions. Please feel free to come in front. We have some seats in front. So to kick things off, it's my great pleasure to welcome the CEO and President of the U.S. Green Building Council, Peter Templeton.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being with us here and for watching us online. We're delighted to have this opportunity. It's a privilege to participate in COP28 with so many colleagues from around the world. We're all focused on making this a productive and impactful COP. And it has been very encouraging to see the progress already, including financial pledges for the new climate fund for developing nations and the announcement by Vice President Harris of U.S. methane rules and the Green Climate Fund. We're particularly heartened to see that 120 countries have backed the COP28 UAE Climate and Health Declaration, highlighting the inextricable connections between protecting the climate and protecting human health. Significantly, these outcomes reflect the critical influence of civil society and subnational governments. So before I begin today, I'd like to thank our hosts, the UN Environment Program and the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, as well as Yves-Laurent Sapovel, advisor to the Director General of the French Ministry of Ecological Transition and co-chair of the Global ABC, who will provide special remarks later today. I'd also like to thank Arup, Building Performance Institute Europe, the Global Building Performance Network, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development for their partnership in this event and their incredible work. Every COP is a critical opportunity to evaluate, refocus, and coordinate our efforts. It's here that the world recommits itself to global cooperation on the defining issue of our time, and it's here that leaders of the business, scientific, and research communities join with delegates from nearly 200 nations to share climate solutions, innovations, and successes. But this year is especially important, coming against the backdrop of UN's first global stocktake, which found that humanity is not on track to reach the goals of the 2015 Paris Accord. The UN forecasts warming 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels by the end of the century, far beyond what scientists consider safe levels. A few weeks ago in Washington, the Biden-Harris administration released the 5th National Climate Assessment, the U.S. government's most comprehensive analysis of climate trends and impacts in America. It found that the current state of decline of U.S. emissions is not sufficient to meet national and international climate commitments, and that climate change is now impacting the lives of Americans in every part of our country. One statistic from that report that captures the frightening nature of that impact: during the 1980s, the United States experienced a $1 billion weather or climate disaster event every 4 months on average. Today, America averages one every 3 weeks, costing the nation's precious lives and close to $150 billion in annual damages. This year, we're at $1 billion climate disaster event on average every 2 weeks. The takeaway from this report is clear, that we must act with greater urgency. Now is the time for climate leaders, including those of us here, to find new ways to work together and strengthen our collective capacity to lead. That's why, in partnership with the outstanding team at Arup, USGBC is proud to announce today the release of a new report on the state of decarbonization in the U.S. commercial building sector. Buildings are responsible for 1/3 of energy-related emissions in the United States, with commercial buildings accounting for 16% of the national total. But as we know, commercial buildings also play a key role in grid decarbonization and vehicle electrification, making them a key convergent point for all decarbonization efforts. Like the Global Stocktake and the National Climate Assessment, the report establishes a deeply researched analysis from which we can look forward to better focus, design, and implement our future actions. Among the report's key findings, we are making real and significant progress. Today, U.S. commercial buildings are 37% less carbon intensive and 26% more efficient on a per square foot basis compared to 1990 baseline. Absolute emissions for commercial buildings have declined to their lowest levels since 1990. What's incredible is that this decline has occurred despite a 55% increase in commercial floor area over the same period. The report analyzes the market and policy drivers behind these numbers and describes opportunities to rapidly accelerate progress, of which there are many. Decarbonization remains uneven across the commercial sector, with significantly higher barriers in historically disadvantaged communities. Climate equity remains one of the most deeply challenging aspects to our work, and one that we must commit to strengthen together. I'd like to again thank Arup, as well as my colleagues Liz Beardsley, USGBC Senior Policy Advisor, and Millie Majumdar, USGBC Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation, for spearheading this report. Before I close, I'd like to talk a little bit about how USGBC is embracing its leadership role in addressing these issues and opportunities highlighted in this report, both in the United States and abroad. USGBC's job has always been to empower the buildings industry with tools it needs to design, build, and operate buildings sustainably and at scale. That tool set includes producing high-quality research and insights for practitioners and leaders like Arup and RMI, with whom we published a guide on reducing embodied carbon emissions earlier this year. It includes working with U.S. government on implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, the single largest investment in clean energy and emissions reduction in American history, and the development of an industry-wide definition for zero-emissions buildings, which the Biden-Harris administration announced earlier this year at our Green Build International Conference, and which is continuing to be refined here at COP28. And finally, it includes strengthening and evolving the LEED certification framework, which is now applied in more than 180 countries and territories globally to define the highest standard of sustainability. And I should note that includes 120 certified buildings here in Expo City, Dubai. Over the next year, we'll be engaging stakeholders from across the global building industry through beta testing and public consultation in finalizing LEED version 5, the next generation of LEED. LEED version 5 has been developed to fully align building decarbonization action with the urgency of the Paris climate targets, while also addressing critical human health, resilience, ecosystem, and equity imperatives. As we announced earlier this year, our LEED version 5 development work has prioritized existing buildings. 80% of all buildings today will still exist in 2050, and there is no scenario in which we will achieve our global decarbonization goals without accelerating existing building progress in this segment. A highlight you'll see in the draft LEED version 5 existing buildings framework, which is available now, includes credits for improving operational carbon performance, reducing embodied carbon of materials used in renovations, executing long-range decarbonization planning, improving climate adaptation and disaster preparedness, and continually assessing and verifying indoor air quality. Importantly, it also includes prerequisites for resilience and social impact assessment. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today, and I would especially like to thank the U.S. public service leaders who are joining us on our second panel. Mayor Avi Bala of Hoboken, New Jersey, Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway of Madison, Wisconsin, and the Honorable Brendan Owens, my dear friend and former USGBC colleague, who serves as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment, Chief Sustainability Officer, and Chief Housing Officer for the U.S. Department of Defense. Thank you for this opportunity to provide remarks. I am thrilled to be here and looking forward to adding to the positive outcomes of COP28 and to building on our partnerships this week. I'll now turn things over to Rob Kay, the America's Climate and Sustainability Services Leader at Arup. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you again to USGBC for the partnership and allowing my colleagues in Arup to work with you on this really critical report. A few things I would like to highlight. The first is, as Peter was saying, we're clearly making progress in the United States, and that's a good thing, right? Yeah, it's a good thing. But of course, the flip side of that is, as Peter was saying, is that there's significant progress, the challenges ahead of us to be able to meet the 1.5 degree Paris target. Secondly, we need to meet people where they are at in the US decarb journey. The report really lays that bare in my view. There is a really granular level assessment of the state of decarbonisation in the real estate sector, to the point where you can actually really target where progress has been made, where there are challenges moving forward, and where those inequities in the decarbonisation journey in many ways echo broader historical patterns of inequality and racial discrimination in the US. And accelerating a climate transition means moving people forward from where they are starting out right now. The way that I think about this is that what we're doing is we're moving a whole spectrum forward. Because in my experience of been doing this a long time, the leading edge moves forward without the trailing edge moving forward as well. All you're doing is building tension in that community of change, and recognizing that what we're doing here, again in the report really recognizes this, is being able to move that whole spectrum forward in an equitable way. The third thing I'd like to highlight is the depth of the analysis that's really open for you to build on. We took what we called a radical transparency approach to the analysis in the report. So in addition to the normal technical reporting process that you'd be familiar with referencing and so on, the analysis really goes both up and down the data streams. And we did that in a way to really produce beautiful infographics. I mean, it really is incredibly strong graphically in the summaries of how the data is presented. But what that also does is entices you to learn more. Actually, the way in which I've been reviewing the document actually is with my thumbs, where I go back and look at the methodological section, because there are very clear methodological steps in the report that says this is how the analysis was undertaken. Because, to be quite frank, the data out there is very, very inconsistent across the US. And so, again, the way that we did this work was to highlight that methodological steps, the data that we were using, with an invitation to actually dive into that and to contribute moving forward. What that also does is that enables you to actually challenge your assumptions. I certainly challenge my assumptions in doing this work. Both on the routes to building decarbonisation, and again how to really think about diving into the various approaches that can be applied across the US. Now, what I'm going to do now, so they were my sort of high-level thoughts. What we're going to do is we're going to move into the first discussion session. Now, what I want to do here is actually set up both the first session and get the creative juices going for the second session as well. You've all chosen to be in this space with us, and our view, our theory of change is that to move forward, we need to move forward together. We need to understand our partnerships, our relationships with each other. So what I would like you to do, actually, when I invite the panelists to come up, is just to look around, and if you don't recognize somebody, introduce yourself to them and ask them why they are here and what they want to learn before they leave. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come around with a microphone and ask you before we start the panel session. Good? All right, can I let the panelists come up? Okay, look around you. I think so maybe could I ask you to go here?
Who? Me, you? Okay.
Tadashi, and Dr. Siniti, can you go at the end?
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Can anyone take it? Can anyone take in photos?
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Hey, everyone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start asking you about the questions that you want to learn from the panelists. So I'll just give you 1 second. I'm literally going to go around and put microphones in front, put the microphone in front of you. And Thomas here is going to start. I just met.
Okay. He put me on the spot, so I'm going to start. Thomas Müller, I'm the CEO of the Canada Green Building Council. We're long-time cooperators with the USGBC for over 20 years, and including green building and LEED and decarbonization. So the question I have for you is, it's about the human element. The human element that, we have the technology, we have the know-how. Yesterday was in a session here. We know that there's a strong business case for green buildings. There's a stronger business case for decarbonizing buildings, but we are in our own way. We are ourselves, our habits, our culture, how we look at it. It's very difficult for us to change. So what would you say is, how could we change that? How can we change the human element?
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, that's question number one. Anybody else? Sir, excuse me.
Hi, good day. I'm Uzoma from Botswana. We've been going through the whole presentations, and I must say it's quite impressive. The only challenge we're facing here, it seems more like it's not targeted to incorporating the developing nations. And one of the challenges we're having, buildings and construction contributes about 40% of the entire emissions and things. And how do we deal with the issue of decarbonizing the construction materials that we use there, the entire building process? And we are sitting on coal in terms of major source of power generation, and we're talking about green energy, and transition will be huge capital that I'm sure we're not going to be able to afford. So what's been done, or how is the strategy to incorporate the developing nations into the plans that the decarbonization process has? Because it's just like kicking the can down the road if it's not done.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. We'll take one more. Oh, two more.
Okay. Hello, I'm Gökçe. I'm the head of sustainability for Vitra bathrooms. So we manufacture basically everything you see in bathrooms. So I would like to ask, we focus on decarbonization and energy all the time, mainly, let's say. What do you see in the terms of water management and water scarcity? And because we only focus on energy and materials and everything, but no water management regulations, I can say, in the buildings. So what do you see as the trends and upcoming strategies?
Thank you. My name is Marina, and I'm focusing now on financing green energy efficiency buildings. And the question I have is, how do you measure and how do you show the positive effects, meaning economical, financial, and maybe social effects of green and energy efficient buildings in order to reply the question why we should pay a bit more in the beginning? And can you share with me maybe some investigations or links to some researchers? Thank you.
Where are you from?
I'm from Russia, if it would not shock the rest.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, look, I'm going to close it now without killing myself on the way up. Thank you for doing that. Thank you, panelists, for allowing me to do that too. What I'd like to do is actually ask the panelists just to introduce yourselves briefly. I think you all have microphones. Perhaps Tadashi, if you could start, we'll just go down the line.
Sure. My name is Tadashi Matsumoto. Thank you very much for invitation. I'm a head of unit at the OECD and leading a program called Decarbonizing Buildings in Cities and Regions. Nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Oliver Arup. I'm the Executive Director of BPIE. And BPIE is a think tank based in Brussels and in Berlin. We focus on decarbonizing the built environment. We do a lot of comparative policy analysis, and we try to answer the question, what kind of policies, initiatives, programs have the biggest effect to really decarbonize the built environment?
Hi, I'm Dr. Sunita. I head sustainability for Mahindra Life Spaces, which is the real estate arm of Mahindra & Mahindra. I'm also the board chair of GBPN, which is Global Building Performance Network, which is an NGO in the built environment space, channelizing philanthropic funding into India, Indonesia, and China for policy intervention and implementation in the built environment. Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. So perhaps, Tadashi, if I'd start with you, just to make some opening remarks, please.
Sure. So thank you very much again for invitation, and congratulations to the launch of this important event. We are very much happy to contributing to implementing, some of the recommendations and implications which are coming from the report. And globally, we are working with not only in OECD countries, but many other countries to support governments, national and local, to decarbonize or accelerate decarbonizing buildings. So today, I prepared some notes from our work. Particularly, we are partnering with the French government on the survey called the OECD Global Survey on Buildings and Climate. And today, in fact, we have a chance to speak about this event at 6:30. Which French government is organizing, and so there we talk more about it. But today, I like to introduce 4 key elements of this survey. I mean, the preliminary findings of this survey as a way of introduction. Yeah. So one point I wanted to say, the first point is about this survey was covering like 22 countries, and found basically the challenges that the countries are facing, and then also trying to understand the innovative practices of different countries. So first findings we found is about the looking at new buildings and existing buildings. So our survey basically finds that currently the policy focus is, let's say, half and half. Yes, so half countries says yes, we are working on new buildings, but the other half is saying existing buildings are very important, as the US report says. And then, but I'd like to highlight that we are also asking in this report survey, a future policy focus. And then we see 82% of countries are answering that, okay, in the future we have to do in existing buildings. So this is kind of encouraging and also important figure. Second point I'd like to look at is the priority among the operation and whole life cycle carbon. Yeah, now currently only 12% of countries are looking at this embodied carbon and materials. But in the future, 44% of countries are answering that we are going to do this, or we are seeing this as a challenge. Again, this is also an important one. So currently, still the focus is how to manage the heating and then energy efficiency and so on. But it's going to move to that. Although one more important point is that the cooling will be remaining as an important focus in the future. Then the third point is about building code. And we look at the different elements of regulations and found that basically 86% of the country says, yes, we are looking at installations and, basically the building code about envelopes and energy efficiencies. Only 24% is currently looking at life cycle CO2. But it's going to be, in the future, changing to more on a life cycle CO2. And then the last point is about embodied carbon. Currently, we are analyzing, what are the measurement, what are the steps that countries are taking. We found that 57% of the countries says, okay, we are going to start with, or we are already starting from the assessment strategy. This is a very important step. But later on, it goes more and more ambitious policies. And let's say 27% is now going towards mandatory regulations or declarations. And then, like France, the advanced countries are doing already trying to set a limit value on CO2 emissions on embodied carbon, life cycle carbon. So these are like steps that you are seeing. So I can talk more about it, but these are kind of rough findings that we found from this our survey. So that's my first intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tadashi. So two things. First is where is the venue for the 6:30 event tonight? Is it the French Pavilion?
Can you remind?
We'll need to check that.
I know where it is. It is the side event room 1.
Okay, side event room number 1. Okay, fantastic. And then the second question to answer the gentleman from Botswana, what was the split of the countries in the developed world and the developing world?
Oh yes, I don't have a number yet, but actually it's around half and half. I'll come back to this to you. So this survey is actually answered not only from the developing countries, developed countries as OECD countries, but many developing countries. So it's mixed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tadashi.
Thank you very much. Well, you all know this is the COP of the global stocktake. The world is coming together here in Dubai to answer the question, have we made enough progress? And if not, what do we have to do to adjust, to accelerate the transition? And all the reports I've seen and heard about so far all come to the same conclusion. There is a positive development in some areas, just as you earlier presented, the decrease of energy, of emissions in commercial buildings in the US is going in the right direction. And in the global status sneak preview, which was released by the Global ABC yesterday on the global situation, we also found that a number of indicators are going in the right direction. So that's reassuring, that's very positive. But if we answer the question whether it's going fast enough and whether we are aligned with a Paris Agreement pathway, whether we are aligned on a 1.5 degrees scenario, then the sobering answer is no. So, we know actually what to do, because we see indicators going in the right direction, but we seem to have a hard time to accelerate that transition. And I think that's what we need to look at, why this is the case. And I hear two reasons in the discussions. One of the reasons is the issue about data. You said, that in the US, the data situation is patchy at best. We focus a lot on Europe in our BPIE work, and we know that the situation there is similar. On the global level, it's dramatically different because it's even worse. Last year's Global Status Report on Building and Construction had a deep dive chapter on Africa, trying to find out what the situation is in Africa. And there we found that, of course, to really come to very reliable conclusions, you need to look at lighthouse projects, at pilot projects, but the data availability is also not there. So I think one of the things we need globally is to really have a global data transparency initiative, an enormous effort to really collect all the data which is there, to be able to monitor our progress much, much better. And the second thing, in order to accelerate the transition, is I think we need to develop benchmarks for our sector, for the buildings and construction sector. What does it actually really mean to be Paris aligned? We're doing some exercises with the global tracker, for example, but every company, every municipality, every national government has to answer the question, is my policy decision, is my investment decision aligned with the Paris pathway? And I think that's the second question we need to answer, where we're not making enough progress. We need to define these benchmarks clearly for all the different actors so that they can align their actions, their decisions on that pathway.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. One of the things in the US report, I'm actually quoting one of my team here, that it was deeply annoying that 42% of the building performance data was from California. And because I live in California and she doesn't, but the sense also that because of that inconsistency, there are open data standards in some parts of the US. Again, there are some lessons here in the report, but actually being really able to leverage that data in a consistent way. And again, we think that AI has an important role to play here. I think moving forward with rapid data assessment. Dr. Sunita, I'm going to ask you to speak. I know that you have some slides, so I think we have to maybe step away.
Sorry. Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. So, taking cue from what Robert mentioned, that leadership has a tail, and that tail, if it moves quickly, there will be a lot of tension. So we will need to move with the stakeholders, and that's what we exactly set out to do. At Mahindra Life Spaces, we are the only real estate developer with science-based targets approved, and there is a huge data gap. There is a huge lack of understanding of what science-based targets in the built environment means in India, and Indian developers, large businesses are now trying to understand their footprint. So there is a huge data gap, and since India is progressing very quickly, it is going to be a huge imperative to reduce both embodied carbon and the operational carbon. And to the point the lady was making about the hard to abate sectors, which is cement and concrete, India has taken some policy decisions and actions around that. But the built environment still needs to move very fast in terms of decarbonization. But how do we make that happen? And it is through this value chain approach, where we realize that if the architectural firms that we are working with, the contracting firms that we are working with, the MEP consultants that we are working with, the material manufacturers, and a lot of innovation is happening in India around material manufacturing, and these are very small startups, and they really don't have the funding to scale, and a lot of climate funding needs to look at alternative materials in the built environment in India, where we cannot look at only concrete for an high-rise, where thermal comfort goes for a toss, and it adds on to the entire operational carbon. So this is how the embodied carbon impacts operational carbon. Next. So it's about a lot of stakeholder consultations. So there is a lack of capacity, knowledge, awareness, institutional frameworks. So decarbonization charter addresses and hopes to bridge the gap. in knowledge and enabling measures and implementation for all. So it is moving towards everybody towards that 1.5 degree pathway in the right way, because that knowledge is missing. We realize that even the signatories to the charter, next slide, so they are all the players in the decarbonization charter. We have about 65, next slide, and we realize that big, small, and all of us have to be in the room together to have meaningful dialogues, because perhaps the big can help the small move, and we can, help in mainstreaming low carbon built materials. We can enable monitoring, operational efficiency, and get to designing net zero buildings. And of course, work with the government for climate aligned codes and adopt science-based targets. So this is primarily which is the work that we are doing. And currently this work was initially funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and now it is funded by the Swiss Development Corporation for at least call to action, and that's important. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you. Tadashi and Oliver, would you mind coming back up?
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. No, it's all good.
I thought it was easier to show it visually.
Well, I was thinking indicator is how many people are taking pictures of your slides. So there was a whole bunch of people.
Share. I mean, it's.
Yeah, please.
We can just share.
Please do. I actually just want to come back and thank you for that. Actually, come back to the first question. Actually, about the role of the role of people in this. I think the way that you put it is that we sort of know what we should be doing. It's a question of then actually making that transition into action. So perhaps starting with you, Dr. Sunita.
So the role of people is critical, especially the behavior management piece. And I will address two people's questions. One is, how do you communicate the energy efficiency gains to the end consumer, because we do residential buildings and it is very difficult for us to communicate. Even if I go and tell my management that it's going to cost me 1% of my cost of construction to get to net zero energy building, and if I were to communicate that to the end customer, how do I do that? So we recently, in 2021, we launched India's first high-rise net zero energy residential building in Bangalore. And the communication was through the power of zero. And very simple communications, they are communicated to the end user through that, how you can live a net zero life, and what are the ways we are facilitating that. So basically to reach out to the people. But there is a government initiative called LIFE, which is Lifestyle for Environment, which focuses on behavior management. So we married both the things together, that if you want to lead a life, you can actually come and live in this net zero building.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I understood your question almost a little bit as if people were a barrier to the right decisions for greener buildings or for renovation. Our habits can be a barrier, yes.
Our desire
yes.
to maintain the status
Yes,
quo.
our inertia, our human inertia.
It's very, very powerful. That's why I was scared.
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't
Okay.
hear.
Okay. So our human inertia, our desire to stay where we are, can be a real barrier. Again, I'd like to mention this. Yeah, the situation in Europe, because for Europe a big challenge is the renovation of the building stock. It's not so much about greening new existing buildings. The European building standards for new buildings are fairly good. They're not zero emissions yet. We're moving there slowly, but the big challenge is the renovation challenge. And that is the question, how do you convince people to really make the investment? And what we see when we do surveys among citizens, among consumers, is one of the big drivers necessarily is not to save on the energy bill. That is of course important, but it's not the very first driver. The very first driver often is an increase in comfort, an improvement in design, adjusting to new circumstances in life and so on. And I think as a community advocating for greener buildings, for less carbon intensive buildings, we're often forgetting the real motivators, the real personal drivers for people. And that's why it's so important to actually, cover and analyze and document the multiple benefits, which the colleague from Russia mentioned earlier, asked a question about earlier. How do we make sure that in the valorization of buildings, we take these human aspects about comfort, for example, into account? And how do we express that in the valorization of a property? That is at the very beginning of the science, so to speak. We're involved in a number of projects on the EU level and on this, but it's not standard business today in the real estate valorization industry. And I think this is one of the shortcomings which could be addressed to accelerate the transformation.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier.
Thanks. Before going to address this, so I correct a bit numbers. So we said this survey is half and half OECD. This is a survey countries. Basically, the answer today we showed is a preliminary result. So that's a difference. So we have more OECD countries in the answer, but we reached out, through the global ABC member states and so on, for like half and half countries, no OECD, non-OECD. Coming to this human aspect of building, so I came to mind the poverty and the inequality issue. So on poverty, I echo what you said, Oliver, more about the comfort and then also the health benefit, for example, not only energy bill, net gain, but also other aspects are very important, particularly for the low-income households or families who are not equipped with a good quality housing or building. That is very important aspect. And then inequality side, actually, I want to say that there are huge inequalities between countries, of course, but also within countries, locations, and then also even within the same city or same neighborhood, you have a big difference in terms of the quality of buildings and then also the type of measures that you are taking in terms of building energy efficiency. So it's very important. And then just one number that I wanted to say is that it's an encouraging number, again, coming from the survey. So 64% of respondent countries have reported that they have some sort of strategies to reduce poverty and inequality via decarbonizing measures. So this is an encouraging number.
All right, thank you. Just a couple of comments to that question. It's cheaper, it's better for you to live in a healthy building. It'll save you money. You'll be more flexible in your life because you'll have adaptability in the building that you live in the future. Now, I'm channeling communication specialists, of course, and elected officials who I'm looking forward to hearing from in the next panel. But just actually simplifying, of course, speaking on the human level, actually about what this transition means to people's lives, I think, and then the lives of their kids as well, in particular. The other, just a comment is that I think the TCFD world and thinking about climate transition planning, I think, is a big trend as well here, because perhaps speaking on the consultant side, is we're seeing a lot of work coming out from public agencies asking actually about the governance of transition. What does that actually mean for people and for organizations moving forward? Because the sense that the technologies are pretty well understood here, they've been sort of doing work in that, but the next phase requires significant change at a personal level. So talking of which, I actually want to pivot a little bit more to the city and subnational and maybe even the community scale, and just ask about examples, perhaps of good practice that you would like to share with the participants here today.
Yeah. So definitely. I shared the example of how we are moving towards net zero energy, water and waste buildings. And perhaps, so that's a commitment as a developer we have taken in India, residential developer, and we are moving towards energy waste, net zero energy waste water buildings. All new buildings will be by 2030. Whatever new developments we are doing will move towards that. That is an example, but it is going via the thermal comfort, human comfort, passive design route, and the metrics that we use are degree discomfort hours, and we analyze the designs of the building and then use the strategies of avoid, orient, shade, reflect, and to look at how we can provide thermal comfort for our residents. And it's also open and ventilate, so what kind of windows will be, what would be the wall to window ratios, and so on. So demand reduction is the first step of the strategy, then energy efficiency, then renewable energy integration, first on site, then off site. So these are the 4 steps that we take for getting to the net zero energy in our buildings, and we do that for every development that we are now looking at. So, yeah, that's
That was really clear. What was the 4 steps again?
So it's demand reduction through passive design. So it's climate responsive design, and then energy efficiency, then on-site renewable energy, and then grid renewable energy. So that's the approach, because we believe that if you miss the first step, the climate responsive design, your cost for renewable energy is going to be high, and you don't have the space for that also on site. So we have to look at the cost for getting to net zero energy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tadashi?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to introduce a bit of a Netherlands case, which I think is very interesting. It's a neighborhood approach. So actually, Netherlands is phasing out natural gas from heat, right? So then the national government and local government work together. So first, governments are asking all the local municipalities to make a plan for this transition. That's already kind of good collaboration. And the national government also provide a financial support to local government. What is interesting in this neighborhood approach is that they are trying to pilot. Within the country, there are different situations in terms of how to phase out from for example, like there are some places where you have district heating available, some place not, so more on effective to use heat pumps and so on. So the government is letting local decide what are the best possibilities to do decarbonization of the energy used in buildings, and then according to their choice, national government is supporting, the financial support. So this is very interesting case, and then it also creates a local buy-in because they are consulting local communities what the best ways, and then also convincing and also receiving some inputs from the local communities what the best position. So that's a very interesting case that I wanted to.
Thank you, Tadashi.
We have collected quite a number of examples of citizen-led and citizen-driven renovation activities. Just literally in the past 2 months, we collected stories from all over Europe, where, for example, the tenants in a typical residential tower built somewhere in the 60s or 70s, who all own their apartment, so it's not a rental situation, it's an ownership apartment, but hundreds of different owners, got together and basically formed a renovation project which really renovated their towers in the city of Milan. We found examples of this in Madrid. And if you're really interested to watch the videos, they're actually available as 1 to 2 minute videos, very short, on the BPIE LinkedIn webpage, or also on my webpage, on my private LinkedIn webpage. What's reassuring about these examples is that people get together and organize themselves and overcome all these barriers of, you don't want to speak to your neighbor, or you don't like this and that person. It's very practical psychological problems, but they have overcome these issues and really said, we got to do something to lower our energy bills, to have higher comfort, and in the end, of course, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's really reassuring. We have a total of 6 stories from all over Europe, and we could collect thousands if we had the time and money, because they do exist. The question is, how do we scale these up? And how do we translate them into a political framework which encourages many, many other citizens to do something very similar?
That sounds really... That sounds like a call for funding. I would support that work. I have to tell you, because I think citizen-driven change. Back to the first question that was asked, actually, developing a sense of ownership of the climate transition. I would also just call back to the report, actually, that's being launched today, and actually thinking of some very detailed tables at a city-by-city level, actually, of the various building performance codes that have been enacted in different parts of the US, and actually analysing where each city is at. Really very fantastic sources of information. Talking of which, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask for a lightning round to close out. So the question actually is around data and information. Moving forward, let's assume that we're here in a year's time, or in another COP, or at some time in the future, reflecting back, saying, well, look at the progress that we've made in being able to assess the change that we are encouraging, that we're trying to empower here. How would that work? What would you like to see or encourage now moving forward to have the data sources, the information source, to actually recognise the transition that we're making?
Yeah, I can start. So I have two cases that I can introduce. One is that I repeat the importance of disaggregated data across subnational scale, because the data tend to be aggregated at national level, particularly discussing in the COP, for example. But my team is really focusing on how to create this subnational data. And not only subnational data, but it's important that to create a compatible framework. So, you can disaggregate and then aggregate and then compare with what you're doing at the national level. And, you can also use it at the subnational level. So just one example that we are launching tomorrow, a different report, but it's called a territorial approach to climate action and resilience. This one, I remember the location. It's, a Japan Pavilion, 6 o'clock tomorrow. And there we are showing these 45 indicators which are compatible national and local level. So this is one.
Could you say the name of the report again?
Name of the report is a territorial approach to climate action and resilience. Okay. So this basically covers, this multi-level coordination and also how to accelerate subnational action, including, of course, building. Building is a key element of it. Yeah, and the second part is more technical. So we can going, into this EPD data thing, perhaps, and what's happening in the different countries is that they are lacking basically this data. So governments or industries or communities or can work together and then how to develop this database which is based for good policy making. So I stop here.
Thank you. Oliver?
Well, if we gather here again in about 2 years or so, I'd like to see the launch of this Global Data Transparency Initiative, which should, in my opinion, put a specific focus on regions where construction is very dynamic, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, to make sure that we do not neglect these regions and gather the data as well. And in the other regions, I think we can make much progress in having higher quality data, much more granular data. That would be very important. But I think we should not fool ourselves. The lack of data must not be an excuse to not do anything. We know enough, we have enough solutions, we need to do that now and we need to accelerate the transition. The data is an important and nice to have factor, but it's not a barrier if we do not have full data.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with you. Before with Dr. Sunita, making proxy estimations and being transparent about what those estimations are, of course, moving forward. Dr. Sunita.
So I'll share the corporate perspective and the Indian perspective. So the Security and Exchange Board of India in 2021, they took a huge leap in getting to what is called the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. And the initial first round launched by SEBI was BRR, Business Responsibility Report, in 2012. And this mandates top 1,000 listed companies in India to report on the core indicators. There are a lot of ESG indicators. So it is more expansive, and it captures the data of top 1,000 companies, but we would still need proxy data for companies that are not covered here, and that is probably 80% of the people out there in the built environment. So it will be a combination of data coming in, and even this data, many companies are just starting to push information out in the public domain, because 2023 was the first year of that comprehensive core reporting.
Look, thank you. Look, I'm going to go down the line, perhaps starting with you, Dr. Sunita, of anything that you wanted to say here that you haven't already said, like your key message, because I think there's an openness here in the room to actually hear from all three of you.
So I think the line here resonates. Incremental change is not enough, and we have to show it through leadership. And I really liked what you say. If the tail lags, there will be tension. So, which is what you mentioned. So 3 sentences: incremental change not enough. We have to show leadership, and the tail lagging will cause tension in the system.
Thank you.
We have to measure every political decision, every investment decision, every business decision against the question whether it's aligned with a Paris Agreement pathway and a 1.5 degree pathway. I think if we do that, we will accelerate the transition, the transformation of the buildings and construction sector very, very quickly.
Thank you. Tadashi.
Yeah, so checking note from my teams, I missed the word saying step-by-step approach. So I said that there are progressive changes in regulational format, and then also, life cycle carbon and so on. Actually, many of you perhaps feels, different challenges in different places. Okay, existing buildings is important, but you can't go directly into that regulatory framework, right? So there are step-by-step approaches that you can choose. So first, start with, let's say, guidelines. You're saying some pilot project and so on. It's very, how can I say, it's easier to find a way. If you don't think too seriously, I have to go to this way, net zero by 2050, we can't see the goal. But you can find the things around you to start with, right? So that we call it step-by-step approach, and then we can use that to advance, not just go ahead, but you can do just one by one.
Yeah, thank you. Especially if those steps have been trodden by others in other places. So I just want to thank you, all three of the panelists. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to transition now and have a short special announcement from Yves Laurent Sapoval. Thank you.
Well, yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm just here briefly to talk about 2 events. First, to thank you and thank Global EBC for organizing all these amazing events. We've been assisting here to many very interesting events about buildings and making the case. This is great. We have to go further. So I wanted to invite you to 2 events, and to call your attention on 2 events. First one is we are launching the Buildings Breakthrough tomorrow at 12:30 in the Al Waha Theatre, which is a very, very big room, and obviously you can come with friends. It's important because we need to make the case for buildings within this COP. Since COP28 and the creation of Global EBC, we've been trying, and we now have a buildings pavilion. There's lots of things happening, but we're not there. And we need to make the case for buildings, definitely. So as many people as can come tomorrow, this is really, and you will probably hear what is a breakthrough, apart from being something that has been invented by the English for being absolutely unpronounceable for French people. I think the next initiative, we're going to find an initiative called Turlututu for us, and this big, this revenge, we're calling for revenge here. Anyway, second thing I wanted to talk to you about is the global forum on buildings and climate that we are, and this is more serious, we are organizing a global forum on buildings and climate on the 7th and 8th of March 2024 in Paris, gathering for the first time ministers in charge of construction at the global level. So please tell everyone. Ministers in charge of construction, as incredible as it may seem, have never been gathered at this scale. We had a meeting in Europe, but we are issuing about 80 invitations, so, and of course lots of countries. Hopefully we have more, and very happy to gather this. It will be not only a ministerial meeting, it will be also a stakeholders meeting. On the 7th, we will have workshops and sessions for commitments, messages, and actions to be announced. And on the 8th will be more the ministerial day, with if we succeed, an ambitious ministerial declaration about green buildings. So I just wanted to keep you posted on that. There is somewhere here information. I can give you cards about the global forum, and please come tomorrow at 12:30. We will be. It's not only the launch of the buildings breakthrough. I must tell you that it's also a launch of an initiative on wood in construction and the cement breakthrough. So we are trying to have an event that is following the ministerial meeting on urbanization and the role of local authorities. So we planned this just following this meeting to make the case for buildings. So please be there tomorrow. Bye.
Excellent. Yeah, I hope everyone will join the launch of the Buildings Breakthrough tomorrow. And there's also an initiative that's being headed up by the International Code Council that USGBC is joining to build capacity for sustainable and resilient buildings. So that's an exciting initiative as well. So excited to have these three leaders from the US here today. Let me start by introducing Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway from Madison, Wisconsin. She's a real leader in the heartland of the US and progressive and green policies. She's been involved in Madison for over 15 years and is really making change. So thank you for being here. Mayor Ravi Bala from Hoboken, New Jersey. And his tenure has been marked by restoring financial stability and responsibility, and including improving climate resilience. So we'll be looking forward to your comments today. Thank you. And the Honorable Brendan Owens, Assistant Secretary at the Department of Defense, responsible for energy, environment, Energy Installations and Environment, as well as being Chief Sustainability Officer. Thank you for being here, Honorable Owens. So I'd like to start by giving each panelist a chance to make a brief introduction to your work on building resilience and decarbonization. So would you like to start, Mayor Bala?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. So thank you for having me. My name is Ravi Bala. I'm the mayor of the city of Hoboken and also a proud board member of ICLEI. It's International Governments for Local Sustainability. And our efforts, which are multifaceted, but as they pertain to green building and ensuring that the built environment is decarbonized, we've developed a climate action plan in 2019 that has a lot of different elements in order to move towards that decarbonization that I'll talk about a little bit later. We have a community solar program. We have an energy aggregation program that directly involves residents as participants in the efforts to decarbonize buildings. And, beyond these conferences, reaching out to the populations that we represent and making them a part of what we're trying to do really is essential. So that's what we're trying to do here in Hoboken.
Hi, everyone. Satya Rhodes Conway. I'm the mayor of Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm also honored to be the current chair of climate mayors in the U.S. I think I'll take a bit more philosophical approach to the question because Madison exists in a state legislative environment that's very restrictive to us, which maybe we'll say a little bit more later about. But I think that, echoing what we've heard earlier, we couldn't possibly do enough fast enough at every level. And so I have felt a real sense of urgency, not wanting to wait for data, knowing that the majority of our emissions from our city come from the transportation sector and the building sector. And so anything we can do in either context makes a difference. Then also because we are so constrained by the legislative situation above us, to do whatever we can as a government to lead by example. And to that end, we build only LEED certified buildings. Yes, well, that's an easy line in this crowd, right? And increasingly LEED platinum buildings. We have, my fleet director is incredibly proud that we have, as far as we know, the only public fleet facility that is LEED platinum. And it's a fantastic building. So we've done a lot to try and inspire change in the private sector. I will say I don't feel like it's working because I don't feel like the private sector is inspired or making change. And so we progress towards, how can we incentivize? And usually that means money. And so perhaps more about that later. But I guess really the bottom line for me is don't wait. Do whatever you can and do it now.
I think LEED Platinum buildings is an applause line, even in this crowd, which, as I look around, most of my favorite people at COP are in this room right now, if that wasn't obvious from the heckling that I got. They all know how funny it is to see me in a tie. And it's great to be with all of you today. Thanks for letting us chat at you. So I am two things at DOD, three things actually. I'm the Chief Housing Officer, I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer, and I'm the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Installations and Environment. And those three things really do go well together in my head. We have 700 installations all across the world. We have about 280,000 what are considered buildings in our real property data set, but we have another 250,000 buildings and structures that are also in our real property data set that consume a fair amount of energy. DOD is the largest federal government consumer. We consume about 50% of the federal government energy just in aviation fuel for the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps. So our buildings load is the other half of our load in a lot of ways. There's a couple things I'd like to touch on in terms of what we're doing to get after and decarbonize our infrastructure. I'll start with a policy that we signed in March, which is basically that we're going to electrify all of the base building systems in all of the 280,000 buildings that are owned by DoD. I should mention we also have, because I said I was the Chief Housing Officer, another 200,000 multi-family housing units that we are also in partnership with various providers with that are also located on our installations. So all of those buildings, as this policy rolls out, will be electric eventually for the base building systems. That comes in two forms. New construction going forward is going to be all electric, and then as buildings fail, as buildings get repositioned, as they get modernized, as equipment changes, we're going to electrify those loads that are currently not electric right now. So that's step one. The second thing is that we're installing microgrids across all of our installations. The microgrid is the backbone that's going to allow for transactive energy on our installations. Our installations, a lot of them are not dissimilar to small cities. They're not dissimilar to some large cities in the United States either. But the microgrid architecture gives us the ability to flex load across our installations and take advantage of the fact that there is a fair amount of diversity in the way that we use energy over the course of a day. The third thing that we're doing is electrifying the transportation, the non-tactical vehicle fleets that support our installations. So not unlike your public works commissions that are driving around their trucks all over the place, we have the similar infrastructure on our installations. We're electrifying all of that, and our microgrid architecture is going to be the backbone on which we leverage the storage capacity of all those batteries that just happen to have wheels on them. So that's the third thing. And then the last piece of this is procurement of carbon-free electricity. The CFE requirements that are coming down from the White House mandate that we are responsible for going out and getting 100% CFE for all of our installations. We are trying to lash up the military value of resilience in our fence line. So we're trying to locate as much renewable generation, storage, and other forms of distributed energy resources inside our fence line as a first step, and then we're going out to the market to procure carbon-free electricity for the rest of it. So end to end, that's the plan for how we are getting after all the things that we are responsible for in the time that I get to sit in the chair to be the CSO for DoD that's left.
Well, we'll be digging into that a little more later. But Brendan, I know when we talked earlier that when you are approaching electrification of buildings, that includes part and parcel doing deep efficiency alongside that. I just want to.
Yeah, and Liz and I had a moment to catch up yesterday, and it gave me a moment. I don't know if y'all know this. I worked for USGBC for almost 20 years. So, like I said, most of my favorite people at COP are in this room. I've been reflecting on this conversation because it made me realize I have been gone for a minute at this point, because anybody who has worked with me in the past knows that efficiency is the first and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth thing on the list. And then you do the rest of the work that's out there in terms of deployment of renewable energy or any of those things. So yeah, efficiency, reducing the load from a DoD perspective is creating resilience, right? So we are creating capacity on our distribution infrastructure, on the leveraging of any of the emergency generation or backup generation that we have deployed. The less that we use on the demand side, the more resilience is supplied by our supply side.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn to Mayor Bala. When I was learning about you and researching for this session, I was so interested to see how you had come into the city when it was at junk bond status and worked to restore financial stability and got it up to a much higher bond rating of AA+, I think. And at the same time, you're tackling livability and resilience, which are not always low-cost items for a city. So how is that financial history impacting what you can do in your approach to resilience in Hoboken?
Yeah, thank you. So that economic turnaround really required a lot of discipline. When I was first involved in government, I was on the city council. We had junk bond status rating. We couldn't borrow for capital improvements, whether they related to the environment or not. We had to go out to other markets. Now we have the ability to, or the capacity to bond because our credit rating is AA+. And one thing that a mayor is really tasked to do, among other things, is ensure that when you develop a capital improvement project, you find funding mechanisms. When we talk about finance, identifying funding mechanisms which don't put a burden on the taxpayer in any given budget cycle. So in the context of climate finance, when we do a project such as a resilient park that can detain stormwater during a heavy flood, we've been able to tap into mechanisms at the multiple levels of government. So with the Department of Energy, we've worked to develop a microgrid. With Resilient City Park, which is one of several resilient parks that we've developed, we tapped into the Environmental Infrastructure Trust Bank of the state of New Jersey, which offers low interest rates for environmentally friendly, climate finance-driven capital improvement projects with back-end principal forgiveness. So it's an excellent program that we've utilized in order to fund climate projects and do so with as minimal cost to the tax burden, taxpayer in any given budget cycle.
Yeah, thank you. If either of you want to jump in on any finance topics, feel free.
But the only thing I would add is that, Madison's finances is, I'm not bragging, Madison's finances have been a little better. We have a AAA, one of the things that we plan on a 6-year cycle for our capital improvements, and one of the game changers has been the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. And we analyzed our 6-year capital improvement plan, and we estimate, obviously the final rules aren't out yet, but we estimate that we will be eligible for $13 million in credits under the direct pay program, which is absolutely a game changer for cities. And, it's... what are we going to, we can just save the taxpayers $13 million, which would be a very, very good thing to do, but we can also fold that money back into additional efficiency projects and save even more money. So I just think that that's for me, in the climate finance space, that's a really big deal. And I think it speaks to what you said about stacking different sources of capital to get projects done, is that now we have another tool in that stack.
And I would say I'm proud to be part of an administration that did that work, that I wasn't involved in any of that stuff, but the fact that they passed those bills is something that I'm extraordinarily proud to be affiliated with, just by the halo effect. Beyond finance, I'd just like Congress to pass a budget.
All right. Well, our report showed, just on a more sober note, that progress on decarbonization is uneven. Particularly both geographically across the U.S. and also socioeconomically, however you break it down. How are each of you in your different roles and with the authorities and powers you have approaching that to try to even out and bring everyone into the clean energy transition?
Yeah, so we view this clean energy transition through the lens of environmental justice. In Hoboken, we are no exception. The most vulnerable people are the most severe victims of the impacts of climate change in Hoboken, New Jersey. Even though we're 1 square mile, this is a fact on the ground for us. So what do we do about it? 2 examples I would point to is a community solar program, which we've initiated, where we purchase renewable energy from a solar farm that's off-site, use that energy to electrify buildings at our housing authority. the cost savings and get regenerated into mitigation or adaptation projects of the authorities choosing. So that's a way to decarbonize low-income housing and also realize actual mitigation and adaptation benefits. Number two, there is a project that was funded by the federal government, not by the Honorable His Excellency Mr. Owens, but by the federal government, called Rebuild by Design. It's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. During Superstorm Sandy, 80% of Hoboken was underwater. The western part of Hoboken is below sea level, and the western part of Hoboken is where most of our low and moderate income residents live. Initiating this project with this multi-level funding that comes from the federal government, goes to the state of New Jersey and is administered in conjunction with the city of Hoboken. Really the focus and the largest beneficiaries of this federal funding are low to moderate income residents in the most vulnerable climate areas of Hoboken, and also the most socioeconomically disadvantaged communities in Hoboken. So we're trying to utilize climate finance in a way that also meets our goals for environmental justice as well.
I'm jealous of the community solar thing. Not possible in Wisconsin. So frustrating. I want to touch on three projects that we've done in Madison. And I think it gets to the question that was raised earlier about the sort of human element as well. So the first program is, it's called Green Power, and it's actually a workforce training program where we bring in apprentices to work for the city. And we put them to work doing solar installations, doing changing out for LED lights in our own buildings, and then more recently installing EV charging systems, since we need to catch up on our charging capacity internally. And these are folks that are traditionally underrepresented in the building trades, and they come in and they learn these skills, and they can get various certifications. So for U.S. folks, it's OSHA 1 and 2 and NABCEP. For international folks, it's safety and solar, basically. And they can go out then and get a job in the solar industry if that's what they're looking for. We hope they don't. We hope they stay and work for us, because we need folks in public works. But it's both building capacity in the trades in Madison, and it is building our capacity to advance on solar. And in particular, so they have installed like 1.7 megawatts of solar. We're more or less on track to do a megawatt, I think, every year going forward until we run out of roof space. So that's one program that we're very excited about. Another is, I think like many cities, certainly in the U.S., and I expect in other countries as well, we have a housing crisis. We do not have sufficient housing. We particularly do not have sufficient affordable housing. So we put a significant amount of money into affordable housing, and that money comes with strings, and it comes with strings about energy efficiency and building performance. And we're not quite at requiring LEED certification or net zero, but we might move slowly in that direction. We run into a lot of the questions about cost and, how can you justify spending more money on an affordable housing building, frankly. So that's a real live conversation. But it is one of the places where we can influence the private sector and require better building performance. The last thing I want to touch on, again, relates to affordable housing. Is our Efficiency Navigator program. And this is designed for smaller multifamily buildings, which are, we call them naturally occurring affordable housing. And so these are unsubsidized, not government subsidized buildings that are usually affordable by virtue of their age and condition. And often not the healthiest buildings and not the most comfortable buildings to live in. And so we, through grant funding, go in and literally retrofit these buildings for free. We will do the energy efficiency, we will do the appliance replacement, we will do the air sealing and insulation, we will do remediation for indoor air quality, mold in particular, and we'll assess for solar. And then we have a solar program that can help get solar on the building if that's appropriate. It's been very successful. We've done 88 units. It's small scale, but in the theme of wanting to scale up, this is, I think, a program that's been very successful in Madison and could, I think, be very successful in other cities around the world, frankly, as well, given the scale of the need in the existing built environment to transform.
That's great. And I know we're going to want to follow up and see if we can work on some case studies with both of you and share that out. Brendan?
So the Biden administration put in place the Justice 40 initiative, which is designed to steer 40% of the spend towards EJ communities. DoD does not have to comply with that by statute, so that is not a requirement that we have. However, when we were doing the analysis as to whether or not we were complying, there are a surprising number of EJ communities adjacent to military installations. Surprising to me. I don't think it was surprising to the people, right? So other people who have better demographic sense than I do. So we have been looking at this as an opportunity. So when we look at deployment of renewable energy on our installations and storage as a resilience feature for the installation, right? What we're basically doing is creating these instances where on normal days, on a good day, the asset is grid facing, right? So it's doing things for the community. Community benefit is accruing as a result of that asset that is just happens to be located within our fence line. We've configured those systems where if it's not a good day, they turn inwardly and they support the critical missions on the installation. But what we've been trying to do is make sure that we are doing enough to increase the reliability of the power systems that are off in the community. 70% of the people who work on military installations live in the community, so there's really no mission without the community from our perspective. So we're making sure that we're not drawing artificial lines, because there happens to be a security fence somewhere along the piece. The second thing that we're doing is that we have a program called the Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program, which we are looking, if we do get that budget I was talking about earlier, it's looking like the NDAA is going to codify that as a standing program. But what DSIP does is basically take DoD appropriated dollars and invest them in solving resilience challenges in communities that support installations. So that's another place that we are looking at the opportunity to have significant impact. And that can be transformer upgrades, it can be deployment of renewable energy, it can be roads, it can be all sorts of things that can improve the quality of life in communities that are the hardest hit by the things that we're dealing with.
Thank you. Turning to Mayor Rhodes Conway, under your leadership, Madison joined the Department of Energy's Better Climate Program, and you've committed to energy efficiency in city buildings to reduce by 25% in 10 years. So congratulations for that commitment. As you alluded to earlier, it's a little harder with the private buildings in your city with some constraints from the state. Could you speak a little bit about those circumstances and what you're trying to do to work with the local community?
Yeah, thanks. I think, I was thinking about this earlier when the gentleman asked the question about the human element and how we move forward. And I really do think we've had to wrestle with that in Madison because our state, we are preempted on just about everything interesting in the state of Wisconsin. And so we don't, for example, our state controls building codes and we can't pass a code to exceed. And we can't do anything that even looks like a building code. And so we're really in the space of trying to do everything we can where we touch a building. So if it's our building, great, we can do whatever we want. If it's somebody else's building and we are giving them land or giving them money, then we can ask for more. but if we have no leverage over it, we don't have any regulatory ability. So we have to sort of hope that folks will do the right thing. But this is where I think that the question of the human element comes in, because when I think about the progression, like what it took for the city to make the decision to only build LEED certified buildings, and the time that took. I like you. The time that it took for us to like move our facilities and our people and our architects, and to educate them around what does LEED certification mean, and why do we care about green buildings, and why is this a priority? And I think it's boils down to a combination of a couple of things. And so one is leadership. Right? You need somebody at the top who is saying, you must do this. This is important. I care about it. And you can't ignore it. And then you need, and it helps if that person is somewhat stubborn. And then I think you need to think about professional development, and you need to think about education, and think about helping people understand the why and the how of things. And I'm talking about the architects and the engineers that work for the city. And then I think really just persistence. And what happened in the city of Madison is we had a sustainability director who was embedded in facilities and engineering, and she believed in this, and she wanted to get it done, and she educated her colleagues, and she developed the policy, and she found the funding, and she proved to them that actually if you do this, we can save money, and then we can use that money for something else, and then we can use that money for something else, and people started to see the benefit of that. And now she's gone. She moved to, I don't know, somewhere in Minnesota, and I pulled the sustainability director position out of engineering into my office, but it doesn't matter, because all of those facilities folks, they drank the Kool-Aid, they got religion, and they now do it themselves without having a sustainability director sort of monitoring and forcing them. So that was a real culture change moment. And so I think that I think about how do we translate that sort of outward to the entire building and construction community in Madison, but perhaps it applies more broadly than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to piggyback on, I think the challenge of getting the private sector to do what you're doing so incredibly in the public sector is that there's a values gap, right? So what are the interests of a private developer? It's the bottom line. It's not necessarily to make an energy efficient building, but it's to make money. So with that in mind, at least in the state of New Jersey, we have, I believe, a little bit more flexibility. And in our redevelopment plans, one of the things that we try to do is incentivize developers to make more efficient and greener buildings, LEED certified buildings, by providing what's called bonus density if your building is LEED certified at a certain level. So for example, if you want to make an 8-story building, you can make an 8-story building however you choose. But if you want to potentially make more money, you're going to have to build better. And that would be a LEED certified building at some standard, silver, gold, whatever the case may be, and we incentivize greener buildings through that redevelopment process in redevelopment plans. So that's one mechanism that I think the state of New Jersey offers. Perhaps that's not available to all, but it's one that I think in some instances in Hoboken has been effective.
That's great. Unfortunately, we're needing to come to a close because I had a lot more questions for this great group. Let's do a quick lightning round. Is there one thing you're taking home from COP to help inspire or lift the wings of your work at home? Brendan, you want to start? Sorry.
I've been particularly inspired by the health and wellness line of inquiry. One of the things that I'm experiencing in this job, which is not surprising, is that there is a a reluctance to embrace climate for climate's sake, and that's not what DoD does. It's never what we're going to do. That's not really a shock. But one of the things that people in the building really do care about, and people out in the field as well, is the people that work with them and for them, right? So the ability to lash up the climate and health agendas is something that we have been working diligently around. We're trying to meet people where they are, find the things that inspire them. All the solutions are the same. We know that, but get them in the door and the thing that inspires them, and then push instead of trying to drag them, work with them. So I think that piece of it, that element of that, is something that we can bring back to DoD and say, look, this is about climate, yes, of course, right? But it's also about human health. It's also about environmental justice, which are things that are resonant with different interest groups within DoD. That is incredibly useful and incredibly motivational, and having it here front and center has been great.
I think the thing that I'm taking back most is the increased seriousness about subnational actors. And that's really great to see. I mean, I frankly would never have come to a COP before if there wasn't that emphasis on learning from, listening to, speaking with subnational actors. And so I'm inspired by my local leaders that, around the U.S., but around the globe as well. And being able to speak and share strategies and learn from each other. And I really hope that emphasis will stay going forward, and that, at least in the U.S., much of the emissions reductions are going to happen at the subnational level. And so I think COP needs to continue to take that very seriously.
Yeah, my takeaway is, before coming in here to Dubai, we had a mini COP and a global stock take in Hoboken just to assess where we're at. And, this gives me an opportunity to say that we've been able to speak to people from all over the world and find commonalities of issues that transcend not just one state in the U.S., but continents and different hemispheres around the world. So I think it's very important to take back, when we go back to our communities, the fact that what you are doing as an individual can have an impact that's not just within your community, but that's global, and that people all around the world are talking about. So, this is not an abstract discussion. This is not an abstract issue. This is a issue of our times. It's an issue of urgency. It's an issue of crisis, and it's an issue of action. We have to act now.
Thank you. Yeah. Just to close things out, we invite you all to work with us, dig into our new report, the methodology. We know we want to improve the data, but we can't wait for it either. We have to act now with urgency. We want to come back next year and each COP and be able to show progress that we've worked on together. And to our global partners, engage with us, with Arup, with the folks that spoke earlier, and with our global community, because partnership's the only way we're going to succeed in this common mission. So thanks for being here, and thanks for our panel.